And welcome to our meeting today, Cooperatives in Organisational Democracy, hosted by CEEDR, the Centre for Enterprise and Economic Development Research, here at Middlesex University Business School. My name is Dan Azara. I'm a senior lecturer here at Business School, and this meeting, just to let everyone know, is part of the European Union's Horizon 2020 funded project in CASI, which is the International Network for Cooperative Analysis and Social Inequalities. And Julian, who I'm going to introduce properly in a second, is actually here visiting as part of that project from Argentina. Now, this meeting is being shown on Zoom, so I'd like to welcome everyone who's watching us on Zoom. And when we come to the Q&A later, obviously, we'll open up the floor to questions for those who are watching on Zoom and also those of you who are here in the room now. Just a brief word on the kind of the relevance of this meeting, I think, for today. And I'm speaking as a cooperative party member myself, and also a local councillor representing them. And I've produced some publications myself and worked on enterprises. And I'm especially delighted that we've organised this meeting, that CEEDR have organised this meeting today, that looks at comparative experiences between Argentina and the United Kingdom, bringing together those two countries. And I'm also very pleased to welcome Julian and Rebón here, who I cited myself several times in my PhD. So it's always nice to have one of your, as a youngster, one of your heroes to share a panel with them. So thank you for coming all the way from Buenos Aires. So to introduce our speakers then, so Dr. Julian Rebón is Professor and Secretary of Advanced Studies from the Faculty of Social Sciences at the University of Buenos Aires. He's a sociologist and principal principal researcher at the National Council of Science and Technology, CONICET, in Argentina at the Gino Germani Institute, which he used to be the director as well. His research focuses on Argentina's work to recover companies movement, but he's also researched on social movements and social protests in Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, and other parts of Latin America. Professor Fergus Lyon, over here, is Director of CEEDR and Professor of Enterprise and Organisations. He's also Deputy Director of the ESRC's Centre for the Understanding of Sustainable Prosperity. His research focuses on societal and sustainable enterprises, agri-food, sustainable fashion, and ethnic minority enterprises. He has over 150 publications and 50 reports for policymakers. And I'm especially delighted he's coming, given some of those of you in the room can see he's had quite a bad way with his leg, but he's still come to support this meeting today, so we're very grateful to Fergus for that. Now, they're both going to speak for 20 to 25 minutes each, and then we'll hand over to questions from the audience. Julian, I've got a magic pen if you want to use it. Sorry, okay. I'll just fill it in.
Yeah. Otherwise, I can click it for you.
It's up to you.
You want?
Yeah, I don't mind clicking.
Okay.
It's up to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan, for the introduction. It's a big pleasure for me to be here. Thanks to CEEDR, the Middlesex University, for the invitation and for all the hospitality these days. Today, I'm going to present a work in progress, a work we are doing with my colleague Denise Casparian at the Sino-German Institute of Buenos Aires University. This work talks about the new cooperativism in Argentina. Argentina has a long another sense. I want to say too, in CASI, the support for my stay here, and of course for allow us to enjoy this amazing network of comparative research between Latin American and new cooperativism in Argentina. Argentina has a long history of cooperativism. In the 20th century, the agricultural, public service, and consumer cooperatives were the dominant form, while workers' cooperatives developed more slowly. The crisis of the neoliberal reform led to a growing renewal and revitalization of cooperativism at the beginning of the 21st century. First, came the enterprise recuperated by their workers. A few years later, the state promoted through public policy the creation of cooperatives as means of social inclusion. Finally, the generalization of worker cooperatives embraced new branches, giving rise to the creation of edge cooperatives. Worker cooperatives have become the vast majority of cooperatives in the country, around 80%, 15,000 cooperatives. They have also been raised, as in other parts of the world, to a new cooperativism that stands out from the previous institutionalized cooperativism because it's more defensive, more egalitarian, horizontal, and open to the community. The purpose of this speech is to present these worker cooperatives in a panoramic approach, a quick approach, assessing their capability for social change. We are basing our research fieldwork conducted by my research team over 2 decades, as well as on available research on the subject. But enterprise recuperated by their workers in the context of crisis, in the context of general crisis of 2001 in Argentina, which marked the end of a cycle of neoliberal reform, a web of processes of associative conversion of capitalist productive units known as recuperated enterprise, empresas recuperadas, has emerged. These processes have 3 aspects in common. First, a critical situation of the former capitalist enterprise. Second, a process of resistance by their workers, collective to the disappearance of the productive unit. On many occasions, they resort to taking over the productive unit in order to prevent it from being empty and to restart production. Thirdly, as a result of the resistance processes, there is an organization transformation of the company based on an associated management by the workers of the failed company. When resistance to lay off was part of the pre-existing trade union tradition, rescue companies innovated by adding the workers' restructuration. The new companies take the legal form of a workers' cooperative. The peculiarity of this type of cooperative in Argentina is that the members pool their labor to run a productive enterprise. In this way, the democratic principle, one member, one vote, is established in the election of authority by the workers' member, and the system of permanent wage contracts is prohibited. Recuperated enterprise are a persistent productive reality in Argentina in the 21st century. Until now. By the end of 2020, 400 certified COPs and 16,000 workers were registered. They are a small and medium enterprise, marked by equity in the distribution of income, and the workers collective occupy the management function. Through is representative, but through the assembly. These enterprises are more egalitarian, more democratic, and more open to the community than the previous one. In its socio-productive configuration, a hybrid character stands out, characterized by 2 dimensions. First, a limited type of social ownership is developed. The limitation lies both in the intensity of ownership, given that in many cases only precarious and transitory forms of ownership of the productive unit are achieved, are, on the other hand, in the restricted nature of the social, at least reduced to a collective of water. Secondly, while the aim of the enterprise is the reproduction of the workers' collective, the main purpose of the production is the market condition of capitalist hegemony. This cooperative proved to be a viable means of preserving jobs. The structuring logic of the process. With regard to working conditions, the situation is heterogeneous. The right to autonomy in production generally implies a reduction in labor rights compared to stable employees. They are generally registered as self-employed workers with poorer conditions of access to pension and social security and a lack of other protection such as insurance and paid leave. The situation of the cooperative are therefore very heterogeneous. While most have been successful in recovering source of employment, it has not been the case with regard to the possibility of reversing processes of impoverishment. From the perspective of social innovation theory, worker recuperated enterprise will represent an innovation or characterized as social entrepreneurship, since they produce change by founding new economic organizations. However, they recreate elements of the pre-existing socio-productive organization, such as part of the working collective, machineries, and brands, among others. Therefore, their peculiarity lies in that social change is not complete. In the configuration of the new company, the workers innovate in different areas, ranging from the political dimension to the creation of new management and training mechanisms, as well as processes of reorganization of the work. Change is born out of a necessity from the beginning of the recuperation process. Faced with new problems, they need to try out new solutions. However, inherence also make it more difficult to innovate. On the one hand, because there is a tendency to reproduce what is known, and on the other, because the pre-existing technological and organizational infrastructure also limit innovation. Recuperating enterprises are also a persistent reality in the social struggle. The process has had the notable effect of creating a new repertoire of worker collective action available to confront the closure of production units. Recuperation is incorporated into class consciousness as an instrument for the struggle. The process has revitalized the idea of the cooperative as an alternative to exclusion as an instrument of social change. Although, in the beginning, forming cooperative was more an adaptive than an ideological strategy, the desire to maintain work rather than to do it without a boss, the cycle is shaping the working class recreation of associativism. In this way, it stimulates the emerging of a new cooperativism in the country. The dissemination fostering the development of new worker cooperatives and new public policies around the social economy. As we will analyze, this promotes new experiences of cooperativism, first in the most excluded sector of the society, and later in the middle class. Cooperatives promoted by public policy. In 2003, a center-leftist national government launched a series of programs to promote cooperativism as a strategy for social inclusion through the generation of jobs. In particular, one set of this policy directly targeted the creation of worker cooperatives. The program that stood out the most in the period was Argentina Works or Argentina Trabaja. It was developed between 2009 and 2018. With 5,000 worker cooperatives were created. It stipulated the creation of worker cooperatives made up of vulnerable population, mainly, not exclusively, for the provision of social community services, the development of social infrastructure, and the maintenance of public spaces. For working in the cooperatives, members receive an individual subsidy provided by the national state. In addition, the program allocates funds for the purchase of supplies and tools. The cooperative member income provided by the state was initially set at approximately 90% of the legal minimum wage. As time and the government pays by the characteristic of the program change, and by 2023, the subsidy only represents 50% of the legal minimum wage. Although the experience were diverse, in general, non-market productive units were formed, in which the state defined the activity to be developed by the cooperatives and exercise the function of direction. Although some productive units develop products or services to be inserted into the market. In general, there were cooperatives whose activities were oriented toward improving the material living conditions of the community, or toward reproductive work, and therefore has no exchange value in the market. Their main objective was the subsistence of their work. People who had long been excluded from the formal labor market, generally older people and women, cares on households with dependent children. However, the program enabled a certain degree of social empowerment, as its resources allow the cooperative to provide themselves with tools and build infrastructure. This collective ownership, in conjunction with the self-management spaces allowed by the program, made it possible to generate strategic between public policy and social organization, giving rise to co-management scheme in terms of associative dynamics. This cooperative has authority elected by their members as well as frequent assemblies. However, both concerning boards and assemblies decision-making power reside not only in cooperatives, but also in state agencies and in the organization of unemployed workers. Experience framed in public policy that were more successful in sustained production were the cooperatives linked to social movements, where the cooperative figure allowed the institutionalization of social community organization. The inclusion of cooperatives in this type of policies implies an innovation with far-reaching impact, both within the cooperative movement and the labor movement. As for the former, in addition to the fact that policies increase the number of cooperatives in Argentina, created within the framework of public policies became the majority. But by 2012, 3/4 of worker cooperatives were linked to some policy promoting cooperativism. With regard to the labor movement, the combination of the political experience, organization of unemployed workers, the revitalization of associated and self-managed work were some key elements in understanding the emergence of increasingly relevant factors. The popular economy. In 2011, the Confederation of Workers of Popular Economy was created to represent the working classes who earn their living outside the wage relation and who, having been excluded from the formal labor market, invented their own work in order to survive. In this sense, it brings together self-employed workers, self-managed workers, cooperative members, workers from recuperated enterprise, and social programs. This organization was granted with the power to represent the collective interests of the workers by the national Ministry of Labor. In comparison to whether with its allies, achieved a great capacity to mobilize and influence policy during various governments. However, with successive change of government, social scheme gradually abandoned the cooperative element. Although warfare policies persist, the associative element was eliminated. In this sense, just as public schemes to promote cooperative diminish, so be these state redistribution enterprises that have been founded in the head of these policies. And in the backdrop of the revitalization of cooperativism, mainly are a result of recuperatory enterprise and public policy. During the second decade of the 21st century, worker cooperative for the provision of professional service made up of young professional or highly qualified workers began to be formed. Within this process, software and IT services cooperative stand out. This is a sector with high labor demand, and it is high labor demand, high level of innovation, and work organization conditions favorable to participate and collective management. In this context, this cooperative grew in size and organization. In 2012, the Argentine Federation of Worker Cooperatives of Technology, Innovation, and Knowledge was formed. This includes around 30 cooperatives. This cooperative draw on both cooperativism and the free software movement, and emphasize the point in common between both traditions. Some of the free software practices that show affinity with the cooperativist universe are horizontal social relations, specialization of knowledge, and collaborative work among peers. Consequently, in contrast to the Fordist model of organization that tend to prevail in recuperate enterprise, the cooperative deploy flexible scheme of work organization, dominant in information capitalism in general, and in the software and IT service sector in particular. Similar to the recuperated enterprise, assembly acquire a special relevation for decision making in these cooperatives. By inserting themselves in a expanding market, these productive units manage to represent effective strategies for the production of the life of their members, who are mostly men. Although we work a cooperative, they share the limitation of the self-employment worker regime, already mentioned. The good productive convention allow to the deployment of their own social protection policies. Finally, the commercial insertion of the cooperative is supported by the growing market. Although it brings favorable monetary results, it also introduces tension in the society and self-management nature of the organization. Due to the service contracting, modality widespread in the sector. The sale of services by the hour to external clients in the framework of project unit in time generate that the work organization and the general management of the project lies outside the cooperative power. That's to say, the direction function remains in the hand of the contracting company. One strategy deployed by this cooperative to offer the sale of service by team and not isolated individuals, and thus maintain increasing degrees of control over the work and production process, is the intercooperation between the entities that make up the federation. Final remarks. The types of cooperatives presented here in terms of social innovation spread the creation of new enterprises, new organizational mechanisms within them, but also new networks that allow political and economic cooperation between cooperatives. Each of these fields has different characteristics, which translate into different effects on innovation. Contrary to the cooperative promoted by public policy and the state cooperative, the recovery enterprises are not created from scratch. Their main innovations are in the associative field, where the converting enterprise are managed by workers collectively, rather than in the productive file. In this later area, although the convert enterprise innovate, they tend to maintain the peak of production and organization of the previous work processes. In the case of cooperatives promoted by public policy, the primary source of innovation can be attributed to the state, and it is the state that defines the execution of the work requirement through cooperatives. The productive processes tend to be relatively simple, with low innovative dynamics on the part of the cooperative beyond those resulting from the adaptation of the program and those arising from negotiation and conflict between cooperatives and the state. In the case of state cooperatives, the creation of associative enterprise is in line with the flexibility and teamwork prevailing in the sector. In this context, the organization of work and collective innovation are in line with the form of work in the sector. This is also where cooperation between cooperatives in economic terms is more developed. Finally, the history you express of this process is still open. The current economic crisis in Argentina and the presence of an extreme right-wing government present new and different challenges to experience and with them the need for new innovation. The future of cooperativism will again be determined by the capacity of the workers to innovate and fight. Thank you very much.
So this is work that is a paper particularly led by Ian Vickers, who retired recently with us, and also with Nº48, who's been the founder of the INCASI program in the Middlesex, the representative. He also sadly can't be with, he's not well at the moment, so he's not able to join us. But it was some work that's been going on over probably the last 10, 15 years, looking at a particular group of cooperative models called mutual spin-outs. So they're a particular type of social enterprise. So go to the next slide, please. So we're looking at what we call mutual social enterprises, and these are enterprises that all have an element of employee or wider stakeholder ownership. And I'll go through. Some of them are legally constituted as cooperatives, others as other legal forms, as community interest companies and other forms, but still having that ownership by workers and other stakeholders. The paper we're particularly looking at here is looking at how do they actually bring democracy into their organizations as well. And that's why we're looking at the capabilities. How do they actually get how do these organizations have the capabilities to not only design cooperation, but also sustain it under a lot of pressures, like we've heard, the pressures of the market can come in. So we've got three questions we'll look at. One is, what are the structures and processes designed? And I'll bring in this idea of the balance between stewardship and democracy. And secondly, we'll look at how you can deepen and extend the level of worker and user cooperatives when it's under the pressure as well. And then thirdly, we found a key issue in the work were the conflicts and the tensions that were faced by these organizations, that they were having to cope with a difficult environments. They had to make difficult decisions. And so how do they make those? How do they manage the conflict? How do they manage the tensions? And so we can look at that idea of what are the capabilities for managing those sort of difficult situations. So the literature we're drawing on is a lot of work on the sort of democratic governance. I'm really glad you brought up the idea of hybrid organizing just now, because as well, I think that's really important. Maybe we can talk about that later, because we've looked at these as, some of the work on institutional logics as well. But what we find really useful is actually seeing it as hybrids, that there is this market logic, there is a kind of almost a cooperative logic or a and sometimes a state logic and a redistribution logic, but it's about how all these different logics brought together and melded together. So we can maybe talk about that more. I won't go so much into detail here. But we also look at this idea of ownership. What does it mean? Whether it's not only the formal legal ownership, but also the psychological dimension. And then also I'll just come on to some of this a little bit more later, this idea of stewardship models. So when I talk about stewardship, it's about people being selected to represent the workers or represent shareholders or represent others. This idea of a steward role in comparison to a democratic multi-stakeholder view where you've got a more open, more democratic system. Then the next theme that I will touch on as well is within this process of democratic ownership and democratic organizing, we have this process of degeneration that can often come. We often see a lot of literature around the degeneration of cooperatives as the market pressures you mentioned as well, where there were various organizations that set up as cooperatives, but then through the pressures of the market, particularly can degenerate into a more capitalist models as well. So we were looking over time at these co-ops and mutuals that we were looking at. We were finding that they were facing that same pressure, and some of them had particular ways of regenerating themselves and actually building up. So we wanted to look at those processes, and that's where it's all about the capabilities required for that. We're also drawing on dynamic capability theory as well, where looking at the capabilities to being able to adapt, for being agile in these environments as well. And we finally will come to this concept at the end of collective capabilities, which is the capability to be more collective, to learn, and to use that collective approach to actually cope with some of the challenges and to help the group members to flourish. Next. Right, so our case study is a longitudinal study, and we had 12 of these mutuals. They were all as part of a wider program of work looking at mutual spin-outs from the public sector. So we had the mutuals, there was a policy going back to 2008 where parts of the public sector were given, particularly in health services, were given the option to spin out from the public sector to set up mutual worker-owned cooperatives to deliver the services. So that's how we got involved in it. Then an interesting example of these different types. So we had a range of different sizes of organizations and in different sectors and in different locations as well. And in each of the cases, we had about 6 on average, or sometimes more, interviews done with the mutual leaders, the service users as well, volunteers, partner organizations, and a lot of employees as well. Also, as they're public service mutuals, they were all delivering public services. So the key role there was played by the commissioners, the people in the public sector who were funding them and managing the contracts there. So the sort of themes we were looking at here were about the democratic ownership, the advantages of mutualism, and then the challenges as well. Next slide, please. So within this, we also wanted to select the cases that we could fit on this on these 2 continuums. I've mentioned before we've got this idea of stakeholder of stewardship models versus stakeholder. So there's sort of this. So you've got stewardship ownership. On the horizontal spectrum, we've got stewardship ownership going to stakeholder ownership. So that's sort of the legal ownership. And then on the vertical, it's more about the culture, the representation, and the sort of how these are organized. And then you can have both a stakeholder representation and a stewardship representation. So in the bottom left-hand corner here, we've got the classic firm, business, where you've got the directors of the firm are the stewards of the firm, stewards for the shareholders, where there might be, and they're also there in theory, as a voice of representing the dominant powers, which is usually capital. But they can be representing other forms where you've got an employee selected by the company to be on the board as well. So that's an example of a stewardship representation. In the top right-hand corner is a classic cooperative of something which is cooperatively owned by the members, but also they have a high degree of representation and decision-making and participation in it as well. But we also found in our earlier work that there is these other two sections where you can have cooperatives with low levels of engagement, where people are not participating in decision-making, even though they are, in theory, owners as workers. They were not actively involved in the boards and in the decision-making, which is, you could say, is an element of this degeneration process as well. We also found examples of companies which had high levels of stakeholder representation, but without that ownership. So they had the culture and the cultural dimension of psychological ownership, people feeling they owned it, even if they didn't own the bit of paper that had the shares of the company. And some of these were, an example here we had was, for example, an organisation owned actually by a charity, but then the employees had that psychological ownership because they've spent a lot of time and effort giving a voice to the workers and saying decision making. So these are the cases, and I haven't got time to go through, but a whole range of different sectors and different areas. We had 5 in the health and social care, a couple in education, 3 in culture, media, and libraries. There's a whole process of libraries being spun out as cooperatives. And then there's a housing case and a sports and leisure centre as well. We can talk as well about this process of spinning out. I won't go into it in this paper, we've looked at it elsewhere, but is it a form of privatisation or is it a form of giving more work and community control? And what is it? We've had other papers looking at these sort of issues and what it means to leave the public sector. And we're interesting, some of the ones in the health service felt the health service was becoming so marketised in the NHS that they left the NHS so that they could become more true to what they felt the public health service would be, which was an interesting sort of debate that we can explore more. Have it next. So I'm going to focus the rest of the paper on the collective, on these collective capabilities that are required. So the 3 we're going to look at is adaptive design, the revitalizing, and then this deliberative learning, creating those spaces. So go to the next slide. So adaptive design, this is about this important from the earliest stage of these organizations setting up. How do they actually design their structures in ways that fits stakeholder empowerment? But also, how is it balanced with stewardship, particularly when you've got some large organizations? So some of these might have several thousand employees. So you can't have every decision being made by every employee. You've got to have a degree of stewardship decision making where some representative democracy is there. And I think that's where we found this pragmatic balance between too much and too little inclusivity. Some of them actually said we had too much democracy can paralyze decision making and make things a bit too slow. Maybe as we organised this event, we were slightly we were a bit democratic on it as well. We weren't as agile as we were, just because sometimes too much. Sometimes you need agility in decision making as well. Also in the design, the key issue is what is the ownership? What is the ownership model? And that's where we had these 4 types that we found through the case studies. One is a classic co-op model. Staff and service users are both members and shareholders. Sometimes it was just employees being owners. Sometimes it was employees plus the wider multi-stakeholder model, so other members of the community could be members. We had other examples, which are charity, or had an employee trust with trustees, was the overarching model, but then had a sort of democratic process underneath. In one case, the way it had to be set up, it had to set up as a community interest company, which is a legal form in the UK, to support cooperative models and social enterprises. But it needed to, for some reason, I can't remember exactly why, it had to have a single shareholder to allow it to spin out from the public sector. And so the chief executive had to take on that role with a single share worth £1. But then they wrote in that all of the assets and the value of the company would be for the community. So it had that asset lock. And finally, there's one local authority where they were sort of the local authority was the owner, but then wanted to set it up as a cooperative as well. So I've got the legal forms there. I mentioned the community interest company, a legal form set up, which I think it's set up in 2000 and correct me here, but 2005, I think. And it's been growing in the UK. Allows an asset lock, so people can't distribute profit, but it has some flexibility, so it does allow some investment in there, and you can have models where you can bring in more finance in some ways, but it has that asset lock generally, so it has that social benefit written in. Then we've got community benefit company societies, which is the classic UK model of co-ops here, and then also we have the charity model as well. So we've got various issues here around the sort of representation and inclusivity as well. So these are the models that we found of different arrangements for that inclusivity. So smaller organisations would have employees represented on the board, a whole range of them, and sometimes they would be elected by the employees. We did find several examples of employee representative board members being able to be on the board, but those posts not being filled. So again, this example of degeneration of it, and not being pushed. And these organisations were now supposed to recognise this as an issue, and we're doing a lot of starting work on building up the culture of cooperation and decision making in the organisations. We also had membership has an elected representative body, and then that body has a seat on the board. This is for larger organisations. And then we've had other models like less engaged, where you would have membership elects, or you'd have the CEO said that they were representing the staff in the meetings on the board, even though the staff were shareholders and members, they were not sort of attending the key meetings. And then very loose areas, so areas of sort of internal team responsible for consultations and having consultation processes, open door policies of leaders saying they're open to listen to other people, but it's not such an active form of participation as well. So that's the design side. Then we're looking at for those organisations where there had been this degeneration. How can that be? What can they do when their formal shareholding is not being translated into engagement? And that's the whole issue. There was about providing options of different levels of participation, and also trying to enthuse people. And some of these were spin-outs from the public sector. And one of the interviews, a nurse in one of these organisations said, "I'm a brilliant nurse. I love doing that. I don't want to own this organisation. I don't want to own the chairs. I don't want to have to think about these things. I want to get on and do my job." So, so other people, it was about how to enthuse people to take on some of these roles as well. And that's where it's about embedding that mutualism in the organisation as well. And that's where you've got this cultural development process as well. And one of the questions, a quote here from one of the interviews where they said, how mutual is mutual? What's the ideal versus something more pragmatic? And that comes back to this idea of organisations having to react quickly to decisions and not having every decision being a mutual, a sort of going through a decision-making process, particularly when they're bidding for work or having to make quick decisions as well. But on the other hand, this deeper engagement can lead to better decisions and more sustainable decision-making as well. So trying to balance those decisions as well. And then the key issue is how do you actually, some of these organisations are growing very fast. And so how do they, as they grow, how do they sustain that cooperation when they're doing it? So there's a quote on the next page, we'd have to go through the whole quote here, but it's about this organisation that grew, took on a number of other sites. So they were winning contracts. And so some of these other contracts were up for they were bidding to deliver contracts. And this organisation won a contract that had multiple sites as well. And I think they won it from a private sector provider. They took it on from there. All the staff members were moved under what is called 2P arrangements, a transfer of undertakings. So they kept this, they guaranteed they didn't lose any of their conditions, they actually got better working conditions. But then they brought in this whole new cultures from these other sites. And so the challenge there was, how do you actually bring that up? How do you bring the cooperative and mutual ideals in these businesses that were just coming in? So the third area we looked at was this idea of how the capabilities of having that space for deliberative learning and that sort of the collective learning to actually tackle some of these tensions that were being faced. And where it was during a period of austerity, this was going on, so a lot of resource cuts. So while some organisations were growing, others were having to cope with cuts, which again made it really difficult to cope with and to keep the cooperative decision making going when they're under these sort of pressures as well. The key issue found was the idea of transparency and trust building, having it, recognizing there are differences, and these might not be reconciled, but actually having a forum to discuss them more openly as well. And that's where a key issue is recognizing that there is this conflict there. It's not all sweetness and light, and these organisations have very different views. But how do you actually create that collective learning? How do you actually have the good habits of decision making to reinvigorate these organisations? So I'm going to skip over. I've covered a lot of this already, but it's it's more that we can circulate there as well. So to conclude, what we wanted to find through this is this the idea of looking at alternative forms of governance, and how do you actually put the principles of cooperation into practice as well. What the theories that we wanted to bring out and sort of made the main contribution to the paper, and the paper came out in a British Journal of Management actually last year, was this contribution to understand the idea of collective capabilities that are needed to sustain democracy, not just in cooperative, but in any organisation. And there's a real interest in a lot of other businesses, such as B Corps and other private businesses, who are really interested in this idea of having a greater voice and greater cooperation and greater democratic decision making in the organisations. And that's where it is, it is about this idea of the three-way approach of looking at what's the adaptive design, having design that allows you to adapt, and you adapt as you go along. And it's about revitalizing the democracy, recognizing when it's degenerating and reinvigorating it. And then thirdly, recognizing the risk of conflict and having that space for deliberative learning. One question would be of interest when you think, how does this compare the UK to other countries as well? Some people say in the UK, maybe we're not having such a conducive context for cooperation, being very much market dominated and maybe a neoliberal agenda. But then sort of discussions with people in other European countries, when I presented this international audiences there, they said that actually these tensions are there, but maybe in different ways. And maybe the market logic is particularly powerful here. So maybe there's a bit more, even more work we have to do to sustain it. But maybe it's something that you find in Argentina as well. So open for discussion.